You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, it's me again, Steve Adams or Mighty Blue, and you are listening to my podcast, Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. In case you're new here, we interview hikers who have something to tell us. It's my job to try to get the best story I can from them. And today's guest is certainly one of those people who have a story to tell. And usually for me, I let him get on with it without interrupting him too much because his story is amazing. His name is Daniel Winsor, or Beda, and he came to my attention as a referral from Jessica Mills, or Dixie. Jessica and Daniel, a few weeks apart, hiked the PCT in 2017, and as you'll hear, Daniel decided to make things that little bit more difficult for himself. Daniel will be along shortly. After Daniel, we'll be catching up with Katie, who, if you recall from last week, was due to climb Katahdin this Tuesday and start the sobo section of what has become her flip-flop. We'll find out how she did after chatting with Daniel. Finally, thanks for your kind words this week about our new book. I'm going to be reading the second chapter from Winton Porter's Just Passin Thru. I should warn you that this week's chapter has a somewhat liberal use of the censor beep. A bunch of youngsters listen to the podcast, and while I'm sure they hear worse at school, they really don't need to be subjected to a character whose first language is the F-bomb. Not Winton, by the way. So let's get on with it. Here's Daniel Winsor, and as a bit of a background, I recorded this prior to my unfortunately truncated adventure on the JMT. So forgive my boyish enthusiasm for what was then my upcoming hike. Here's Daniel. So today's guest is a PCT hiker. In fact, he's a particularly crazy PCT hiker because he had ambitions to go into the Sierras in May. This is Daniel Winsor. Hey, Daniel, how are you?
Good, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. And Jessica Mills Dixie suggested you should reach out to me, and you met her in her 2017 PCT through hike. And if listeners recall, that was a very, very bad snow year in the Sierras. And that really is what your story is, the main part of your story, let's say. But before we get to that, where did the idea to deliberately hike in the snow come from? Because I don't think people deliberately do it normally. So why did you decide to do it?
Yeah, so I spent about 6 years living in Bishop, California, which is a small mountain town just outside of the John Muir Trail portion. Yeah. And both my wife and I were avid climbers and started going backpacking just because we had heard so many good things about how great it was out there, right? And so, of course, stepping onto the John Muir Trail portion, we started meeting Pacific Crest Trail hikers. And we just kind of figured that you weren't really allowed in the Sierra until all the snow had melted, the last week of June and on. And I had no idea people were even crazy enough to attempt something like that.
There's a reason. There is a reason for that, don't you?
There is, yes.
Right. All right, carry on.
So we met a pair of hikers, and they had told us that this is like the middle of July, and we met this pair of PCT hikers, a couple of the first PCT hikers I'd ever come across. And they had mentioned that the first person through the Sierra, first person over Forester Pass that year, which was a drought year, was the 15th of May. And that blew my mind. I remember that night just pondering it as far as like, how is that even possible? And for some reason, I'm just the kind of person, I guess, the kind of personality that when those kind of ideas come in, something that sounds impossible, it becomes very intriguing to me. so from then,
so particularly crazy wasn't an unfair thing to say about you then.
Right. Yeah. Spot on, actually. Yeah.
Right. So it became a thought in your mind, but were you addressing it seriously, or was it just like, well, that'd be cool to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was something that I kept inside for a long time. And my wife and I were rock climbers, but we're not alpinists. We don't ice climb. We're not mountaineers, right? I had never worn crampons or alpine snowshoes or anything like that up until that point. And so I kept that idea inside of me for a while, maybe hoping it might die off at some point after enough time. But as about a year went on and it was still there. And so I suggested it to my wife, just say, hey, like, I think this is something I want to do. I want to hike the entire Sierra portion of the Pacific Crest Trail from Kennedy Meadows to Sonora Pass, all in the snow. And
how many miles? How many miles is that?
So that portion is 300 miles.
Okay,
and
that's an important number to remember. It's an important number to remember, by the way, because it was more than that. But we'll come to that in a minute. So you lived out there, so you know what the snow's like. It's pretty heavy, obviously during the winter and still through to the early part of the summer, I guess. What did she say? Did she think that was a good idea or what?
So my wife is very supportive in just about anything I want to do. Herself, she's a very strong climber and a very bold climber. She was doing a lot of these highball boulder problems, which are essentially a kind of free solo climbing where you're climbing hard, like physically difficult climbs, 35, 40 feet up off the ground without any ropes. So if you fall, there's real leg breaking potential and those kind of stuff. So
I think I've spotted the flaw already then, because you're married to a particularly crazy person as well then, who doesn't see your particularly crazy things as stupid.
Right.
So I couldn't get my head around that. The fact that you wanted to do it, so you didn't really want to backpack as such, but you were looking to you were looking to backpack, but really the thing that was attracting you wasn't the hiking, it was actually the snow, doing it in the snow. Mm-hmm. What was that attraction? Was it because it shouldn't be done, or what was the attraction to you?
That's probably part of it, and also just knowing that one of the downsides of the JMT, which you'll see here soon, is the crowds. And I'm sure it might be alleviated in your mind because you might be more used to the Appalachian Trail, over here where there's just more people out. But I had never seen so many people out in the middle of the backcountry as the John Muir Trail. And it's a beautiful stretch of trail. It's by far my favorite stretch of trail I've ever been on. And but it is busy. It's very busy. The permits are a heated competition to get good ones, as you probably know. And I remember it kind of dawning on me. It's like, if I could get out there on the John Muir Trail in May, I bet I could have this entire place to myself and see it in a completely different light. Because at that point, we'd done all of the sections of the John Muir Trail several times. And so I'd seen it, and it's beautiful. But that realization that you could see it totally different, the same place, only more, I don't know, grand or more hostile or remote.
That did make more sense to me when I read it, because you wrote about that in your book. And we're going to talk about your book later. But you said the thought of being on that trail with no one else around at all, that was another attraction as well. So, but that wasn't it, was it? Your wife made a suggestion which wasn't just that section of the PCT, was it? Of the Sierras rather. What did she think you should do?
Yeah, so since we'd been living, both my wife and I are prior military, so we had our GI bills where the military pays tuition and then also a housing stipend to rent a place. And so we've been using that money in order to just survive in this travel trailer and have this, free period of our lives in between leaving the Navy and kids, which were in the future, settling down and doing all that. And so Melanie, when I brought all this up to her, she's like, well, you're kind of already planning on doing this large section of the Pacific Crest Trail and probably the hardest section. So, why don't you consider doing the full thing? Why not just start at Mexico and just see, if you can get up to the Sierra. You have to wait until May to go into the Sierra anyways. So why not just in March, we'll just go drop you off at Mexico and see how far you get, and yeah, I mean, at that time, I
want to interview Melanie, by the way.
you
want to see where this came from. So she wanted you to get out of the house for 6 months. I understand that as a concept. Yeah.
That's right. We weren't showering very often. It's understandable. I get it.
So the idea was to start, I presume, the Pacific Crest Trail in Mexico earlier, and then get to the Sierras at about the time you wanted to get there. Was that kind of the plan?
It was. And like the plan kind of shifted around because the drought years that I became enamored with the idea of doing it in the snow was a lot it was a lot less snow. Like I could pretty much get in the Sierra whenever I wanted, and I'd still, I'd be able to see snow. But when the winter of 2016 and 17 started progressing through, and Mammoth Mountain, the ski resort up that, where you can kind of get a good measure of how much snow is in the high Sierra section of that trail, is they recorded 600 inches of snow by the time that winter was done. That's 50 feet of snow.
Yes.
And that's not the deepest part either. The deepest section that is unmeasured is back in the backcountry around the Muir Pass area, just a very remote part of the Sierra. That's where the storms all tend to just concentrate, and they'll dump 6 or 8 feet of snow at a time. And some of these storms will hit day after day after day.
Not in July, hopefully.
No, there are blizzards.
We're interviewing a few days before I go away, so I'm sure there's going to be. I suppose there's still the possibility of snow. I know I shouldn't do this. This is my hike. There's still the possibility of snow now, is there?
There is. The Sierra is notorious for the occasional July blizzard, but nice. The temperature swings are so wide though. They're 40 or 50 degrees. So like usually what will happen is the temperature will plunge down at night, and if it is going to snow, it'll snow a few inches. You'll wake up to a white wonderland, and 3 hours later it'll be gone, and you'll be hiking on normal trails again.
Oh, I would love that. Now, so you had to change your plans, and I think what I was reading this morning, you ran into the problem with the permit process. Did you leave it too late? Mm-hmm. Once again, actually showing that you weren't a backpacker because you were doing things and being able to get out on the trail whenever you wanted. But that isn't the case for the Pacific Crest, was it?
Right. Yeah. I had no idea. I knew the JMT permits had heated competition behind them because we dealt with those. But in my head, I just didn't. I hadn't really met that many Pacific Crest Trail hikers. I kind of felt like there was a permit process, but if I was early enough in the season, I'd be fine, right? But I had no idea. It's the exact same as John Muir Trail. People are waiting for the second that website opens up so they can, some people have 4 different computers open all ready and all ready to go, to get their perfect date. And I had no idea. So where we were camping at with our trailer, we had no cell service. And so we had to wait until the day after permits went live. And I thought I was on top of things. We went to the local coffee shop, and I sat down and logged on, and every date that I had wanted, which the middle of April was kind of the standard, that's when you should go. That's the advice that had been given me. And that would have put me in the Sierra starting the middle of May. So that should have been perfect to see some snow. And every
perfect being a relative term in this case, but yeah, carry on.
Perfect for my twisted definition of perfect.
Yeah.
and so what happened was all the dates in April taken, some into May and some back into March. And I had honestly at that point, because the winter had been so gigantic, leading up to that point, I had started to chicken out a little bit. I'd started like I wanted to see snow in kind of a normal snow year or maybe a drought snow year. I don't really know if I wanted to see snow in a record snow year and go and try it, because I didn't really know what my, where my skills, where my, my preparation would lead me in that case. Like I said, I wasn't an alpinist. I'd never done any of this, certainly no like long distance mountaineering. And I really didn't want to be the fool that really thought I could do this and get 100 miles in and then have to ask for someone to come fly a helicopter in to pick me up. Like that's
not unreasonable.
My worst case.
But I think I read this one that you tried a shakedown hike. Your Melanie dropped you at some parking lot somewhere and picked you up 24 hours later. But it was a pretty fraught 24 hours, wasn't it?
It was.
It was your shakedown hike. And tell us what happened on that, because that sounds pretty terrifying, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so this was after I had already committed to my start date in the last part of March. It was March 26th, and was very unsure whether this was a good idea, but I just went ahead and said, okay, I'm just going to move towards this goal. Like I can do it, and so part of that were these shakedown hikes. And where we were in the Sierra, we could get up to the snow relatively easily, just a half an hour drive outside of Bishop. You can climb all the way up to 8,000, 9,000 feet on roads. And so I just had Melanie take me to the end of a closed road and took off. It was beginning of February 4th or something like that.
Perfect.
But obviously that's extremely cold in the middle, the beginning of February in that elevation.
Yeah,
and so I had more or less what I was planning on taking into the Sierra with me, my same kit, so I could actually see how it would fare in those kind of conditions. And it's simply wasn't enough. Like as I was hiking out there, I was in my alpine snowshoes and I had triggered a small avalanche. I was following a road, but the road was smoothed over with powder, and at my heels, a big shelf released and slid down this hillside to my right that was, you know, probably 1,000 or 2,000 feet down, and I just watched all this snow tumble down. And so I kind of kept going, you know, and was in a little bit of shock. And I had planned on hiking up the Paiute Creek drainage for a little bit, but I got to kind of the parking lot area, and I was like, okay, I'm going to stay here because I'm not really. I was 6 miles away from where Mel had dropped me off. I said, this is good enough, and yeah, a wind picked up. I knew the temperature was going to be low, and they were probably about 15 degrees or so, which seemed tolerable enough. But it started getting windy, and it got really windy that I wasn't planning for. I didn't know it was going to come. And I remember gathering water out of a small creek that was uncovered. The creeks will still run even when it's that cold out. But as I gathered water and set my bottles down on the ground, turned around to get something out of my pack. And by the time I turned around, the water had frozen solid in the bottles. And so now I had water bottles that were unusable, and I still had to gather water for the night and, you know, bring water into the tent and all that to cook with. And that took me by surprise. It's like, okay. Then I learned a harsh lesson about fuel in stoves, that underneath a certain temperature, your fuel in your jet boil will stop working, or it'll be hard to light. And so all of a sudden I couldn't get I couldn't get my fuel to start. I couldn't get my stove on. After a while I gave up because my fingers, I couldn't actually like strike the stove anymore because they were so cold out of my like big puffy gloves. You know, that I was like, okay, I just abandoned hope and hurried up and got my shelter in, and the winds were going crazy, and I barely got my tent even halfway decently pitched and got inside. And I remember I stayed up the entire night shivering. I couldn't feel my hands, couldn't feel my feet. And
sounds like fun.
Yeah. Half of my brain was like, oh my gosh, I just got myself into this situation that I need to flee this. I need to get out of this. But if I leave, I'm shivering inside of my sleeping bag. If I get outside of my sleeping bag, I don't think I'm going to make it even 6 miles to the road. It was just this entire night of just panic, followed by just this, you know, this terrified, you know, dread of what I put myself into. And of course, the PCT is in my mind the entire time. It's just like, it's impossible. There's no way. I can't do this. Like I can't. This is the first night out, and this is beyond miserable. And I'm supposed to do this for a month.
That actually should have been the end of the story. Yeah, I mean, you should have realised you're not up to this. This isn't working for you at all. So you went back home, obviously, and met Mel in the car park. She must have seen this terrifying sight as you came towards her. Right. So shaking and all that sort of stuff. So how did you reset your mind then? Because that, you know, frankly, makes me nervous, that sort of thing, you know, when you're in a situation which you can't handle, and you because February obviously was too damn cold to be out there, I guess. And perhaps people are, and good for them, or perhaps they got different stuff and warmer gear. Did you think to yourself, I cannot handle this, and I'm not going to, or did you say, I'm going to work out how to do this?
Yeah, it was when I first got back to the car, it was definitely like I just looked Mel in the eyes, and I was just like, I don't think I should do it. I don't think this went so poorly. I think this is all a mistake. You know, I think we should just go climbing and like I'll forget all about this PCT thing. And Melanie knows me. Like she knew at that point that I really wanted to do it. Like she knew it was an aspiration. So she just kind of calmed me down. She's like, okay, let's get you warm, you know, before you make any big decisions, and like talk through it. And so over the next couple of days, you know, I discussed with her what was going through my mind, what the failures were. And all of it was stuff that could be mitigated, you know, if I knew it was going to happen. And so I abandoned some of I started, like a lot of people before long treks, I was very weight conscious, you know, like everything had to be ultralight. I was so worried about, you know, grams of everything and weighing every possible little piece of gear I had. And after that, it was like, if I needed a sleeping bag liner, and if a sleeping bag liner was made of concrete and lead, I still would have tossed it in my pack. I was just like, I need whatever I can. I need to be warm. I need to sleep. You know, like it just kind of solidified in my mind, you know, if I put the, you know, extra weight in my pack in the right places, then theoretically it would fix it. And so after that, I did two other hikes like that, two other shakedown hikes where I went up into the high alpine and took my springtime Sierra setup and came out. Both of those are still uncomfortable moments, but they went much better. And so I got
I still would have encouraged me, mate.
Right. Yeah. And it's still, and I don't know, there's still a part of me that was like, maybe I'm never going to have to do this, right? 700 miles through Southern California might cripple me. How does a human walk 700 miles? That part in my head was still crazy to me. I had no idea that so many people actually, walk that far on the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, you thought you could be one of only about 10 people to do it, weren't you? I seem to think.
Yeah,
seem to remember.
I thought it was.
But there's a lot, people, and it has an attraction. So were you then starting to get excited about the hike, or was it still all about the snow through the Sierras for you?
Yeah, it was. The Sierra were definitely the focus point in my head. But there was also, as soon as I started the hike, I met my hiking partner's name was Convict early on. I started with her on the same day, and me and her got along real well. And so that part of the trail experience where I kept coming across her and camping with her, and then, the whole through hiking experience of starving for a while and then coming up on an awesome place to eat, and then going back on
ridiculous
the trail.
amounts of food. Yeah.
Just eating a ton and seeing some. I thought Southern California was going to be a total suckfest, desert where I just imagined the Mojave Desert just staggering northward for 700 miles toward a squiggly vending machine, and just, being a total no fun in the hiking department, but just as an impressive, I hiked 700 miles to be able to say that I did it. But it turns out the desert, quote unquote, desert section of Southern California is gorgeous. I mean, it follows a mountain ridge line.
Everybody says that. And it's one thing I hope I get a chance to see someday. But so you started, you were ready to go, and then you got started to get some pain, didn't you? And you had to leave the trail for a little while. What happened there? What did you get?
Plantar fasciitis was a big plague of mine through the PCT, and I switched over to ultras, like a zero drop shoe, about 2 months before I left, and that was, of course, on a bunch of recommendations online, of people that love them, and I didn't quite dig deep enough to find the contingent of people that also hate them, and I didn't know. I'm not sure if that was the problem or not. It was just I'd never walked that far either, and who knows. But yeah, as plantar fasciitis set in within the first few hundred miles, and it's a pain that's it hurts in the morning, right? Like the arches kind of rock up, like to tense up, and it hurts to stand out of your tent. But I found that after just walking around, pulling my stakes up and wrapping up everything, within the first mile or so, it would deaden to where then I could get my miles done for the day. So
deaden's not a great thing, though, is it? It's not a good thing to do. So you did actually take a little bit of time off trail, didn't you? You went back home to Bishop for a week or so?
I did, yeah. So at 700 miles at Kennedy Meadows, I got there on May 2nd, and I think it was May 2nd, somewhere around there, early May.
May 12th, you told me before. Yeah, I thought it was May 12th, but okay. Oh, no, that's right. 12th. So you got back on, didn't you then? That's right. You went off, then you got back on. Okay, right.
Yeah. So I was off the trail for 8 days, waiting on my best friend from the Navy. His name was Miguel. He was going to come join me for the Sierra portion. And we had planned this quite a while back. Miguel is a farm boy from the desert in Nevada. They're growing things in the middle of the desert. That's how tough he is. I don't know why they're doing it there, but he was a good friend from the Navy. Him and his family were like family to me. And when I told him about what I was doing, he was on board. Like that sounded like something that he wanted to do, just a very difficult thing to try. And so I've always considered Miguel a tougher man than me, and I knew that he would be I would be tapping out before he would, even though I had just hiked 700 miles. I knew he'd be able to walk in and just pull me through the snow if need be.
So when you got to when you headed out from Kennedy Meadows, that was the start of the Sierras for you. Had there been snow before south of that or not? Was that the first snow you'd seen?
In Southern California, there's two main mountains that have snow on them in the early season, San Jacinto and Baden Powell. And so those two, there was 5 miles of snow on San Jacinto, and I think somewhere around that same amount, maybe a little bit more on Baden-Powell, like 7 or 8 miles.
Right.
But it was all pretty reasonable. I mean, those mountains do. I think someone died last year, maybe the year before on San Jacinto. They're steep mountains, but the actual terrain isn't nearly as steep as the Sierra was. And I kind of learned some valuable lessons through those mountains. I ditched my micro spikes.
Right, interesting.
After I saw people with crampons and just saw how much of a cakewalk it was for them, walking across these like 40-degree slopes that my hiking partner Convict I mentioned, she took a bad fall that kind of spooked me when we were hiking together, and I could kind of feel I was on the edge, and I had been fully planning on taking my snowshoes and microspikes into the Sierra. And after I saw one of our buddies, specifically named Nico, just stroll by us like he was on a sidewalk with crampons on, I was like, I want those. I don't care. Again, like I don't care how much they weigh. They can be made of concrete. I don't care.
So now you were expecting to be in snow for quite a bit of the Sierra. You didn't know how much it would be. Tell us how far you actually walked in the snow.
So it was about 460 miles from when I left Kennedy Meadows to Sierra City. And I should be specific that entire thing wasn't one solid stretch of snow, right? There was, I say it's about 80 or 85% of that was snow. Because even in the middle of the Sierra near Muir Trail Ranch, we had an 8-mile dry stretch there. So there was through the high Sierra portion from about Lone Pine area, so like the Mount Whitney area, to Mammoth or even to like Tuolumne, that was probably 95% snow, maybe even a little bit more. But then towards Sierra City, it thinned out.
So what was that like? I mean, tell me, how do you get through snow? I mean, was it deep in places? I mean, tell us what it was like to get through it, and how long it would take you to do a mile, say.
So it varied greatly. Our longest day was 25 miles in a mixture of snow, and some asphalt was in there, a road walk portion. And but as far as moving along on snow, you were doing real well if you were at 2 miles an hour. That's a pretty strong pace. We found that I think
that was my Appalachian Trail pace. That was my Appalachian Trail pace.
Right. Yeah.
Without any snow.
And sometimes, I mean, snow is kind of weird because it's really slow going up, but then on the downhills, if you get really good with plunge stepping and techniques to get down, you go down a lot faster. So you might be moving uphill at 0.5 mile an hour, but you can move down the backsides of these passes at 4 miles an hour. And so it's kind of it's a bizarre place to measure a pace, but there's some snow conditions were nice and hard to where it just felt you were walking across a sidewalk and you could really step it out just like you were on a sidewalk. And then other snow conditions where we called it eggshell slush, which is where the slush would melt really deeply, say 2 or 3 feet deep during the day. And that would literally just be like you were walking through a snow cone, 2 or 3 feet of just like this goop. Like it's so hard to get anywhere on. And some nights it would refreeze only hard enough so the very top layer would be 2 or 3 inches of firmed up slush. And then you go walking out on it like, wow, like everything's great, everything's hard. And then all of a sudden, it would start softening in the morning as early as 8 or 9 o'clock. And you'd start breaking through that into this sea of slush underneath it. And then trying to pull your snowshoes back out of it and reestablish and then break back down into this. I mean, we going up and over Pinchot Pass, which is typically one of the easiest passes in the John Muir Trail section, was a nightmare. I think we spent over, I think it was 6 or 7 miles in that eggshell slush, and at our slowest we were at 1/4 mile an hour.
Oh my word!
And absolute exhaustion. Like I had mentioned, my partner Miguel, his trail name was Amped. I've never seen him any kind of phased by any physical activity that we had ever done together. And he had lost all excitement about being my friend at that point.
Really? Oh, dear. So what other considerations are there to take into account when you're in snow? Where do you camp? I mean, how do you know you're on the trail, or do you have gut hooks? I mean, how do you plan your days on the snow? I just wouldn't know where to start, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's totally strange, and it's definitely very unique to Pacific Crest Trail hikers in that early season. There's not most people that enjoy snow stay out of snow when that's happening, right? The springtime melt is not a time that people like going backcountry skiing or they like going for hikes. They usually like either powder, to play in, or they like nothing, right? There's dirt to go and explore. And so Pacific Crest Trail hikers have this weird consolidating snowpack that they're trying to figure out. And one thing I realized kind of early on was that even on dirt patches, like we come across dirt patches at the lowest points, and we'd be excited, like, hey, this is where we can camp. There's dirt there. But the problem is all the slush and mounds of snow around are melting throughout the day, and it turns all the dry everything into mud. And so even though you're excited, you can see dry ground, you can finally see the trail, you still have to go pitch your tent up on some adjacent snow patch just to get away from, mud being mushed into the bottom of your tent.
Yeah, well, I've got to tell you, you're not selling this at all to me.
Are you sure?
No, this is not.
You don't want to postpone your hike until next
I would ever
May?
want to do. I tell you. So were you? And you did tell me that you were able to develop ways of making things a little easier on yourself. One of which was hiking very early, and very early for me is about 7 o'clock in the morning. But you've been out there for 5 hours by then, hadn't you?
Right. Yeah. So we, after that day that I told you about over Pinchot, that had gone so poorly that on top of the pass, both Miguel and I were shells of ourselves because we were so spooked because we were so far out there. We felt so trapped, like we couldn't even call for help there. A helicopter would have to come and land somewhere beyond the eggshell slush, and we'd have to still get off of it. So it's just this feeling of being so far away from help and being so overly exhausted that, all the panic is kind of processing through your head. But after that day, while we were sitting on top of that pass, Miguel said, he's like, we're going to wake up tomorrow at 2:00. And I didn't argue. I said, okay, it sounds insane. I don't know how night hiking in the backcountry is any kind of a good idea, but I was on board. It's like, we have to try something because we can't do this again. We don't have the physical exertion levels to be able to do this for another, week or 2 weeks. And so, so we tried it, and that made all the difference. It was insane. And I thought, I'd always been resistant to night hiking because I just wanted to see the terrain I was going through, right? But it turned out that we started summiting passes, like we summited Mather Pass at 6:00 in the morning. And so right as, you're hiking under the stars, and the stars are so bright out there, you can actually see shadows.
No ambient light. Yeah, no ambient light. So it must have been beautiful.
It's incredible. I mean, that's where you can actually see the Milky Way as cloudy purple and yellow. You can actually see like there's no end to the stars. There's no space in between stars. Fabulous. It's just a solid blanket. And so you can see all the jagged peaks, the outlines of these peaks against the stars. And then we'd climb up these passes on hard ice. They'd go way better than they had been going the previous days when we were climbing in slush. And then we'd be standing on top of these passes and watching the sunrise at 12,000 feet. Wow. In the most remote, part of the Sierra. And there was something about that was so incredible that, at the end of those days, Miguel and I, we finally felt like something had clicked. We'd finally figured out how you do this,
But that's your rhythm. We often talk about rhythm on hiking on the AT. We talk about AT obviously mainly, but you get into a rhythm when you're hiking. And I was wondering if you could get into a rhythm when you're snowing. When you're hiking in snow rather. But in your case, it sounded like that's what you got. You worked out how to do it, which gets you into the rhythm you need to make it worthwhile for you, doesn't it?
Exactly. Right. And those days, it wasn't like we were waking up at 2 a.m. and then hiking all the way until 5 p.m. or whatever. We shifted our window to where we were done by 10 or 11 each day. And part of the pain, another unforeseen thing that I had no idea was coming was the sun and the heat that we'd have to deal with. Hiking underneath an alpine sun at noon is incredibly hot. It's insane and everything is white. Everything around you is white.
Wow.
I mean, you feel like you're in an oven. And even though you're buried sometimes at that point, like hip deep in slush, you're sweating like crazy.
Once again, man, you're not selling it. You're not selling it at all.
I know. And these are the things, just like, I cannot believe how uncomfortably hot I am right now.
So were there times in any of that hike you felt as bad as you did in that February shakedown, or were you knew what you were doing by now and you were pretty comfortable that you weren't going to die?
Yeah, the discomfort that I felt actually on trail in the Sierra, like actually on my Pacific Crest Trail hike, was in the exertion side. It was things like hunger. It was, hiking in that reflective environment. It was, having just like wet and frozen feet all the time and trying to figure out how to mitigate that.
Sure,
of course, wading creeks was highly uncomfortable.
I bet they were particularly tough that year, weren't they?
Yeah. So what I actually found was, even though I was most scared of the snow travel, most intimidated by the idea of being in hundreds of miles of snow, when I actually stepped out of it, it was by far the creeks were the most scary part by a large factor. Snow became second nature. It became just like, that's just what I was hiking on. I became good at it. I knew all the techniques with my crampons and everything. I knew how to move through it efficiently. And so that became second nature, but the creeks were always a wild card that you never knew what you were going to find when you walked up on one. All of them had notorious names, some more notorious than others, especially in the North Yosemite section. But some had snow bridges over them that you just walked over and never had to get your feet wet. And other little seasonal streams that you never even heard of were trying to kill you. Like no idea, what you were going to find until you actually walked up on it. And part of that suspense, that year there's a couple people that had really bad accidents that came really close to dying. And then a couple of people ended up dying later on in the creeks. But the amount of fear that came up, especially after those accidents of a couple of the first people that had went through, like I think at one point when I was in Mammoth, out of the 6 hikers ahead of me, 2 of those hikers had been swept down rivers. And these were people that were only a few days ahead of me, and it was just like, oh my gosh, like 2 out of the 6 have been swept away. It's just like, oh no, like what am I doing? And so a lot of North Yosemite after Tuolumne was spent, in this kind of apprehensive fear of the next day, just like, this next creek is tomorrow. Like, this is where we're getting turned around. This is it, and I certainly am not the type to where I wasn't going to go swimming across whitewater. That's not my personality. I'm definitely, although I enjoy being in a dangerous environment or a risky environment, I like to feel like I have control over what I'm doing, or like having that risk assessment as to whether it's like, what are my odds of getting across this safely, and it has to be pretty good. I'm definitely not the type that it's like, oh, like I want to get across this river and it's a raging whitewater lake. I'll just hop in and paddle across. Like that's not me. Like I was expecting, as soon as I saw one that was like that, I'd be like, okay, turn it around. Nope. Like I'm going home. And
so you eventually got through the snow and the snow was done and you went all the way up. I presume, did you go all the way to the end or not? You carried on with the hike, right? So, yep. But there were also fires that year and relocations and so on. Mm-hmm. So you made it. Was it worth it to you? Was the whole experience worth it?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, it was beyond the greatest life experience that I could have asked for. I mean, the whole time north, I was very set on connecting my steps. Also, that was a big goal of mine, was to not only get through the Sierra portion, but to also walk a continuous path.
Yes.
And of course, the forest fires threw wrenches in that constantly. And this is where I started talking with Jessica Mills a little bit more, was in these forest fires. She was a little bit behind me and just kind of like asking what I was planning on doing, because she was kind of in the same boat too, like trying to find a way to walk, around all these. And they were just happening. I mean, there was probably a dozen of them, as we were moving through Oregon and Washington, and including a gigantic one that was just over the border in Canada that was really threatening the monument itself. And so the whole way north, we were just, waiting for the news to come that we couldn't even go see the monument after all this work.
That's a lot of anxiety. That's a lot of anxiety to have on the trail. It really is.
I really tried to not let it, get to me on the hike, because I was enjoying moving through all that terrain. I mean, there's through Oregon and Washington, there's a lot of the Green Tunnel, which a lot of people gripe about, but in between the Green Tunnel, there's some incredible places. I mean, the Sisters Wilderness and Crater Lake in Oregon. I mean, there's some gorgeous places around those Cascade volcanoes. and I really was enjoying it. But it just kind of seemed like I was always one day behind the trail closures, like a friend I just camped with a couple days before would make it through, and then I'd walk up as they were, pulling the tape across the trail. And so
you got home, you had your adventure, and you've now relocated to Alabama. Wow, you do like Jessica then, didn't you? She's Alabama. I know. So you're with your wife and a newish daughter, I believe. Is that right? You got a daughter?
That's right. Yep.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. My daughter Zoe, she was born last April.
And what I was thinking, would you have done this if you'd had kids back then?
No, definitely not. Yeah.
Because you knew this was damn dangerous, and you deliberately took that on, but your perspective changes, I suspect. Then now you've had a child. So does that mean? Now has your wife less crazy than she was?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. Also the same.
Also a good thing.
yeah, which is probably good, and it is just kind of. It's not like we wish we wouldn't have done those things. I'm glad we did those like more risky outdoor adventures while we could. Yeah. It's just now the thought of with Zoe, and I've got a son coming in November, then it's
I didn't know whether I should say that. I didn't know I should say that or not, because you did mention that to me before. And I thought maybe he hasn't told the family. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah. Well, congratulations on that. Now, I know you wrote a book, and you sent me this book called Crunch, which, by the way, is a great name. Crunch, I really like that. Now, and when I was reading it, I think to myself, it's quite detailed in those early days. So, because I've only got sort of cut up 2 or 3 chapters, 4 chapters, something like that. And did you journal along the way? And was that always the plan to write a book? Because you didn't know that this was going to be a 400-mile snow year, did you? So, how did the book come about?
Well, I have a math and engineering heavy background, and I've always been one of those people. It was just that's all I know, and I don't write. I'm not an English. I have no skills in the English arena. I've got no business writing ever. And I just
once again, you're English not selling the book here, by the way.
I know. Hey,
no, it's good. I like it.
It's gotten a little bit better. But what happened was, as I was going along, I did journal every single night in my tent. I made it a point to sit down and write, write out the events of the day, just in, quick bullet form. And then I started a blog, and the blog, looking back on the writing now, is almost embarrassing in comparison to what the book turned into. But so many people were so interested in what was happening on the Pacific Crest Trail in 2017 that a person that had no business having anybody read their writing, all of a sudden I had thousands of people on my webpage, every week or whatever, that were hungry to see the pictures. And since I was one of the first people into the snow, and I was also documenting it, I wasn't the first, but I was definitely the first one actually showing people, this is what it looks like out there. This is what the creeks look like. This is what the mountain passes look like. I was putting all that information online, so that way hikers behind me could look at it for themselves and say, yes, I want to try it, or absolutely not, I'm going around it,
So you had the blog, and because I'd imagine that seeing snow all day long would merge days into another. You wouldn't, that's snow. We had a snowy day today, and then we went up another mountain and had another snowy day. So you provided this. You provided the readers this blog. So when did the blog turn into a book then?
It was just along the way. There were so many people that had mentioned it, and I'd said so many times, no. I'm not a writer. I don't even know the first thing about writing a book. This is just my blog. This is just my journal, so I can look back.
You're very articulate. No, you're very articulate. You could write because you're articulate. So I wouldn't worry about that. And what I've read so far is well written. So I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I think it like anything I do, I'm definitely a little. Like I said, it's the same thing as going into the Sierra when the idea of a book came along, and in my mind there was that resistance of you can't do that. There's that same fuel. It's just well, now I want to. Now it's something that I've told myself I can't do. It's now I want to figure it out and I want to do it. And by far, writing that book and going through the whole editing process, the humiliating process of sending my writing to other people that are professionals, and have them send it back and tell me how ridiculous, how many changes needed to be, undertaken. Through that whole process was by far a more challenging and tough part of this whole thing than the hike was. Like when all's said and done, it took me almost 4 years to write this book, and the hike in comparison to 5.5 months, just walking every day. It's like, I had no idea. I thought it was like, oh, I'll just kind of glue my blogs together and send it off to the publisher. Done, right? That's all a book takes.
It's a very collaborative process with other people, and you have to trust other people, and it's that moment you give them the manuscript to read, you think, oh God, what are they going to think now? It's going to be terrible. But I think they like I think, and I would always bring everything back to hiking really. People want your success. They want you to do well. So they're not going to deliberately trash you. They're going to say, well, perhaps you might want to change this here, change that there. So you get that process. So as I say, I've enjoyed it so far. So what are you hoping that people are going to take away from the book? Don't do it, or just be prepared and recognize what you're taking on. Because what you've just told us sounded bloody terrifying to me. So,
right.
I will not be doing that.
And I think some people have taken from my blogs that, they're like, that's something I want to do. Like, that's an adventure I want to have. And other people, like you said, they'll read it and say, I will never set foot in the Sierra in May and June, ever. Because of what you've written. And my goal has never been, I've been accused online, like people like to do online, right? Is like people, especially in 2017,
please,
I was getting accused left and right of just trying to get people to go into the snow just by putting my photos and videos online. And in my head, I was like, people are going to know right off the bat, if they look at these pictures, and their gut reaction is no, they're not going in. It's not like, oh, some guy on the internet said that he got through it. I'll get my backpack on and go give it a try.
One thing you need to learn very, very quickly is to develop a thick skin and ignore people like that. They have no idea what they're talking about. Oh, it drives me crazy, that sort of nonsense.
Right. I dig into them in the book too. I make fun of the Facebook forums, and I kind of paint this picture of this Cheeto-stained basement dweller just on his laptop in his mom's basement, just screaming at people online.
Knuckles dragging on the floor. Yeah, oh God, yeah.
Right.
Forget all that. Well, look, I think what you've done is, I'll go back to particularly crazy, but good for you for doing it and for trying it. I think it's a remarkable story that you've lived and you've now put together. So I thank you for coming on the show, and I wish you well with the book, and hope you don't do anything so stupid again. Now you've got 2 children.
Yeah. No, I think those days of doing anything nearly that crazy are behind us. I think we'd be happy settling with just a normal long hike with kids along. I think it's about as risky as we want to go.
Go for that. Okay, man. Well, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Steve. I really appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
What a story, eh? 400 miles of snow walking. I can never imagine that attracted me, but as they say, it takes all sorts. I've got to say, his book is pretty darn good, so I've included a link in the show notes. Check it out. And while you're checking it out, don't forget that my book, or books about my 2014 thru hike, are still available and selling on Amazon. You can even order them directly from me at steveadamsauthor.com, and I'll sign them for you if you insist. I'll link to both Daniel's book and mine in the show notes. Before we get on, it's thank you time. This week, thanks go to our monthly donors, Melanie Swisher, Lars Hubbard, Hugh Eckrath, Michelle Brown and Jessica Diaz, while William Matthews and Douglas Ross also stepped up with a donation this week. If you think that we're delivering value to you with all our shows on the network, please consider a donation, either a monthly or a one-off, by clicking on one of the Hiking Radio Network donate buttons that you can find all over the site. Thanks so much to all of you who have done that. Now let's catch up with Katie on what promised to be an epic day indeed. Here's Katie. Now, here's Katie. Katie hasn't actually said anything to me yet, but what she did do, she sent me a photo yesterday of her on the brown sign at Katahdin. So I'm afraid you need to tell us all about what's happened.
Oh my gosh. I can tell you, Steve, that was the one single most epic thing I've ever done in one day.
Isn't that amazing?
So we had decent weather. It was overcast, but the clouds would part just as you were getting to another view, and just, oh my gosh, you could see the valley below and the other peaks, and and some occasions you could see what was up ahead of you. So
let's just step back from that. Let's talk back to
sure.
because you flew up last time we spoke. You were going to get a bit further in Connecticut, didn't you? Weren't you? So
further in Vermont.
Oh, you got Vermont. That's right. So where did you actually get off the trail?
So got off the trail at Manchester Center, Vermont.
That was the plan.
And then took a flight out of Albany up to Monson,
right.
And then had a shuttle from Monson to Millinocket, and I'm staying at the AT Lodge.
Right.
And so, yeah.
So the plan was yesterday, obviously, to go up Katahdin. Tell me how you felt that morning.
Well, terrified.
You sent me a text. You sent me a text that you were terrified. And I said, just enjoy it. It'll be a blast. And it was, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I took your advice. You said it is. I can't remember your words now, but something like epic, or it's. You told me to have a blast.
Yes.
And I did. It was, oh my gosh, it was so amazing. And I think it was so fun because the weather held out for us.
That's always helpful. Yeah.
And also what really worked in my favor is the day I got here to the lodge, I ran into a couple about my age who I had met back in the first part of Vermont or the last part of Massachusetts.
Nice.
And we had chatted together, and they were planning to summit, and then flip flop, just same as I'm doing.
All right.
I think, and then another woman, again, about my age, maybe a little older. She. When Henri, the tropical storm was coming, they just decided they didn't want to hang out for that. So they got a shuttle and came up to Maine to head south. So there were 4 of us. And it was nice knowing I wasn't going to be doing this on my own, I think. I think
agree.
I felt
it's a wonderful thing to share. It's a wonderful thing to share with other people, isn't it?
Yes, it was. I feel like I could have, and I would have been just fine. But it was better to do it with people. Yeah. It definitely was.
So you got there. You had to. Did you? When I went there, you had to register with this yellow ticket you got to go up there. Have they still got that? Oh, right. Okay. What number were you to? Even though you're flip flopping, what number were you to register?
I don't know what I was. I have a card, and I have a yellow piece of paper that I have to leave when we head out into the 100-mile wilderness. Once we leave Baxter State Park, we have to leave that in one of the drop boxes. But
so talk us through it. Talk us through it because I know that when you first start, you're driven by adrenaline, and the first mile or two is dead easy, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. We were like, wow, we've already done 2 miles.
Yes.
Okay. No problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, well, to start with, I was thinking I wanted to camp the night before and then go up early so we weren't descending in the dark.
Sure.
And the way it worked out, I was able to, the 3 people I hiked with, we just talked it through, and we ended up staying the night at the lodge, and we got up and left 6 a.m, and it's almost an hour drive from the lodge to get to Katahdin Springs campground.
Uh-huh.
So then, so we got there about almost 7:30, and we were on the trail by 7:45.
Nice. Nice. So
shed some of our weight. I didn't use one of their day packs. I used my little Z packs, but it squishes down almost like a day pack.
Sure.
And yeah.
So the first couple of miles are quite easy. Then you literally have to start pulling yourself up by the up a few boulders and stuff. So talk us through it when you actually get, because I remember that moment when you suddenly go above tree line on Katahdin for the first time, because straight in front of you, it looks like a vertical climb, doesn't it?
Is that the one with the rebar?
Oh yes, yeah, very necessary.
Yeah. It was. I will say that I did have the luxury. This couple that I met up with, he has some climbing experience, and he just said, "No, just do this. You're fine." And I really did feel fine the whole time going up.
Lovely.
It was, I've climbed plenty of ladders, so the rebar just felt like climbing a ladder. Yeah. And then you just, for me, it's like, just don't look behind you, Phoenix. Just don't look behind you.
Yes, yes.
Till you're secure. So it really was, the climbing itself, the rocks were dry. It was decent weather, a little overcast that would blow away now and then, and you'd have views. So I guess about 2 miles in, the poles need to be put away.
Yes. And
then you are doing, hand over hand climbing, and then, looking for the better path. And so, and then you come out and you're on this incline that's all boulders and little path through them, and you're like, whoa, it's a ridge, and you can see where the mountain pulls away on both sides, and I'm like, wow,
you're driven, but don't you think you're driven by adrenaline though? You're at this stage, because you're physically prepared for it. You've done 1,000 miles, over 1,000 miles already now, so you're prepared for it physically. Did you find it daunting as a climb, or was it joyous as I hoped it would be?
I will tell you, it was joyous. Good. It really was, and I thought, and I felt like I went slow enough that I wasn't intimidating myself. It was, I'm not saying it's not intimidating. It is one big mountain.
It is, yeah. But had you got over I know you wanted to finish at Katahdin, and I'm sure now you can certainly understand why I think that's such an epic finish anyway. I always have thought it's the most amazing epic finish. Did you still feel fabulous though when you got there, when you see the sign and you're going across the tablelands and you keep going up and suddenly you see the sign? As you're approaching it, did you have a mindset that this feels like a real moment for you?
Yes, I'll tell you. When I was about a half mile away, I could see people around I could see the sign way up ahead.
Yes.
With people around. I thought, oh my gosh, that's the sign. And my pace picked up a little bit, and it was really exciting. Really, it was okay for me that it wasn't the terminus of my hike. It was still iconic, and it transformed for me what was an abstract image, Katahdin, Katahdin,
yes.
Mount Katahdin. You think you've seen pictures and, all this, but what was wonderful, it was no longer abstract. Yes. I had just gone up the Hunt Trail and, done the whole thing, and it was not, it was something very real. So, all the worries and the things you played out in your mind and the concerns and that would be hanging on you are no longer there anymore.
Yeah. Well, in fact, they are, because you've got to get down again. That's the problem.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, we went, sorry for the motorcycle noise.
Right.
We decided to descend because we weren't sure how fast we would go. And I didn't want, because we didn't get an early start. We didn't get it started as early as I was thinking I wanted to.
Yeah.
We decided to come down the A-Ball Trail.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, which is, I can tell you, I don't know if you've done it, but it is every bit as steep as the Hunt Trail. It's just shorter. So we came down the A-Ball Trail, plenty of miles of rock scrambles and climbing down.
I've heard it's all rock scramble.
It is absolutely all rock scramble. But we came down, and then we were able to walk out of Able campground, and then that set us up. We had to walk, like almost 2 miles back to Katahdin Spring campground where we stayed the night. But still, it got us off the mountain before dark, so no time were we, hiking in the dark, going up or down Katahdin.
Yeah,
so, and that was that was a good plan, I thought, and it made us helped us to have a safe journey up and back. Yeah. So,
well, I'm going to put your summit picture in the show notes this week because it's a great picture. You look like, I know you're not a big woman anyway, but you look pretty thin in that picture. I don't know whether you've lost some weight. You really do. You look very, very slim in that picture.
I have not. Well, I probably overall on the trail I've lost about 10 pounds.
Oh, right.
But really haven't lost more weight in many miles. So this morning I ate 2 pancakes, 2 scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, orange juice, coffee.
Yeah, of course you did, because you can, yeah. And the problem with that, of course, is if this was your finish and you carry on eating like that, in a month's time, you put any weight you do lose, you put it back on with interest. I certainly did. So now your journey south starts, and this is going to be interesting for you as well.
That's right.
You're now going to be bumping into people you hiked with before, possibly, when you go south, which will be great fun, I'm sure. And the 100-mile wilderness really kind of starts. When are you starting, tomorrow or today?
Starting tomorrow.
Oh,
we're gonna. I need to resupply and set up my food drop. I'm gonna do a food drop about halfway, so I'm not carrying 8 days of food, and then we'll start out. I'm actually going to start out with the same people.
Nice.
We said, well, let's just start out and see how it goes, maybe just get ourselves through to Monson, and then we can reassess whether we want to keep hiking together.
Sure.
It's just a kind of a practical thing.
Yeah.
And they're delightful people. So,
well, I tell you, I think it's, the 100-mile wilderness I enjoyed far more the second time because I didn't get off it. Because the first 4 days out of Monson when I went in 2014, I got off every single night.
Right.
Every single night I went back to Monson, which was ridiculous. It was expensive, and you lose some of the atmosphere of being in the 100-mile wilderness. When I went in 2019, Trigger and I, we just experienced the whole 100-mile wilderness. So, and I say to you, enjoy it. It's just a wonderful hike. That period of time. You got some great mountains to go over towards the end, particularly. You're just going to have another blast, and I'm looking forward to hopefully catching up with you when you've got through the 100-mile wilderness with a bit of luck within the next. You may not get through, so we'll see how it goes next week, shall we?
Yeah. It depends on if I can get cellular up on one of those mountains in the southern part of it.
Yeah, well, don't worry about it. Just enjoy it. The Bigelow the Bigelow Mountains are, I don't know when are they in the 100-mile? No, they're not in the 100-mile wilderness, I don't think. But the Bigelow Mountains are just fantastic. You're just going to have you're going to love Maine, you're going to love New Hampshire. So look, enjoy the rest of the day and relax, and then really get into the 100-mile wilderness. So I think you're going to have a blast again.
All right.
All right?
All right, Steve.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Cheers then. Well done.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.
She did it. Katie and I actually carried on speaking after we finished recording, and she said that she felt something of a burden had been lifted for her. She's been looking forward to and was kind of concerned about Katahdin, but as you heard, she took it in a stride and had a blast. It makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up just mentioning it. A couple more things. Last week I mentioned that I'm looking to add a few shows to my network, and I'm flattered to have had quite a bit of interest so far. As I said, I'll be teaching the podcaster how to record, I'll set up their show for them. I'll get the artwork and music, give them a podcast website on hikingradionetwork.com, and edit it and distribute the shows. There's a cost involved, of course, but it will be much less than you'd have to pay to set yourself up, learning all the things I did wrong when I started. If you have a serious interest in having a show that spotlights your thru hike, or even if you have an interest in a regular hiking show about, well, any topic related to hiking, get in touch with me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com and we'll make it happen. Or at the very least, we can talk about making it happen. And last today, I just wanted to put in a plug for the Woods Hole weekend, coming up soon. If you recall, we did this last year, and it was a terrific success. Everybody had a good time, and we all went away from there with a renewed love of everything hiking, and of course, for Neville at Woods Hole. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make it this year, but it's taking place, at Woods Hole of course, from September the 30th to October the 3rd. I'll put a link in the show notes so that you can find out more. Hope that you all have a great time. Now, to finish up this week, Winton Porter tells us about a young man who had an unfortunate meeting with a snake. He also introduces us to a woman whose language appears to be centred around one particular word. Don't worry if your kids are listening, all they're going to hear is a regulated beep every now and then. I'll see you next week. Chapter 2. Pansy Ass and Other Funny Plants. It's an unusually warm morning for early March, and weary hikers are starting to stroll off the trail, cross the road, and stride into the parking lot of my store hostel rest stop. I've just returned from the hospital with a snake-bitten hiker who goes by the trail name Brainstorm. When I first met Brainstorm, he was standing by the stone wall on the back side of the breezeway, catching a smoke before bedtime. Pale-skinned and mostly naked, he was a natural target for snakebite, a lot of unprotected skin shining in the dark. He was wearing boxer shorts and white socks. I asked him where he'd hiked in from. He gave a courteous sideways blow of smoke, which caught the wind and covered me anyway, and said Gooch Gap, about 14 miles back. Just as I looked down to admire his white cotton socks, the copperhead that had admired them first struck at lightning speed from a crack in the masonry and sank its fangs deep and hard into Brainstorm's big toe. Just as quickly and silently as it had appeared, the viper slipped back into the crack. Brainstorm felt the hit and started a shaking dance backwards, screaming, "What the hell was that?" I said, "It looked like a copperhead, but it could have been a rat snake." "No shit," he groaned, hopping on one leg. He shoved the cigarette back into his mouth and grabbed his foot and kept hopping. "What am I supposed to do?" "I suggest that we get you to a hospital to see if that bastard pissed his load into your bloodstream. You'll be all right, but we've got to move." My words didn't calm his nerves completely. He lowered his foot back to the ground, but he couldn't walk, and he wobbled onto his knees and dropped to the ground. There wasn't much of a doubt anymore about what was or wasn't in his bloodstream. The only question was how much of it. I grabbed him under the arm and lifted him back up, helped him shuffle over to the parking lot, and steadied him carefully against my car before letting go. Brainstorm yammered and moaned. Damn it, this sucks. Should we tie a tourniquet around the toe or what?" "No," I said. What we're going to do, is get you in the back of that car, get that toe situated below your heart, and get you to the emergency room quickly." Strapping a tourniquet on a snake bite is a cardinal sin of first aid. You stand to lose a lot more from cutting off blood flow than from a copperhead bite. Sucking the venom from Brainstorm's toe would have made a funny YouTube video, but it would have done little good in preventing the spread of the toxin. There was one quick home remedy that would have worked pretty well, and that was just slashing his foot off with my knife. But I don't think Brainstorm would have gone for that. He had a lot on his mind. "I don't have insurance, man," he said. "And if we don't get you down this mountain now, you won't have 2 feet either," I said back. He managed a nervous smile at this as I helped him into his seat. Another hiker, who had come running when he heard Brainstorm cry out, rode along with us and helped check the vital signs. We phoned 911 to alert the hospital that we were coming, and then we rushed down the mountain. Brainstorm had a look of confused feistiness, and that was a good sign. It meant that he was fighting back worry and fear, which usually catapult victims into shock. He screamed out, "My freaking toe is turning purple. It's twice the size of the other one." With that proclamation, Brainstorm was starting to shiver slightly, which could signal that panic was starting to tear him down and could lead to shock. I hollered into the back seat, "You're doing great. We're almost there. Stay calm." I stepped heavy on the gas and managed to take a few minutes off the 25-minute trip to the hospital. When we arrived, Blairsville's emergency teams were waiting. 2 paramedics loaded Brainstorm onto a gurney and disappeared with him through the double doors. I waited for a couple of hours and was told that they could not administer an antivenom because they could not confirm that it was a copperhead. They would need to keep him for the night, hooked up to a saline drip to help wash out the venom. I saw Brainstorm in the hallway and waved to him as he was rolled into his most expensive hostel on the trail. The next morning, after I bring Brainstorm back into Mountain Crossing's hostel side, I climb the stone staircase and am greeted by a couple who, it turns out, have driven down from Rainbow Springs Campground in Franklin, North Carolina, to introduce themselves and provide advice on how to handle hikers, whether I want it or not. The woman is thin, mid-50s, and stares at me as if she expects me to know who she is, even though I've never seen her before. "Hi, I'm Jensen Crosman," she finally says, and gives me a stern look. She declines to introduce me to the man she has in tow. I reach out, shake her hand, and then extend it to the shadow behind her. Not surprisingly, he turns out to be her husband. Name's Buddy, same as one of my guys who works here at the store. "Great to see you," I say. Thinking I'll get some more information with a question, I ask, "Are you out for a hike today?" "Oh no, not me," says Jensen, just as Buddy is beginning to get his mouth open. "We just came to meet you and tell you about our hostel and drop off this flyer." Buddy reaches around from behind his wife and delivers an advertisement for their place. The marketing item turns out to be a piece of yellow paper with information crudely written, possibly by a child, maybe one of their grandkids. "Well, thank you," I say, doing my best to figure out whether I'm looking at a picture of a pine tree or a crocodile. "Have you started to get some hikers?" "A few, but we're ready for them. We put new mattresses on the beds this year." Now I'm catching on. This is the couple and the place mentioned about halfway through Bill Bryson's immortal book about the AT. "Great. I expect that a walk in the woods really helped your traffic." Jensen's face turns red and her eyes bulge. It's clear that I've struck a chord. I'm about to learn to avoid this subject with her in the future. Bryson's book doesn't exactly flatter her, or her cooking, or her bunkhouse. Years later, she's still got a grievance against that author, and she's making sure everyone knows about it. "That she growls. Jensen has a raspy voice, probably from years of cigarette smoking, and I suspect that she usually sounds irritated. Her favourite word, I also quickly discover, is in all its forms. Noun, adjective, adverb, sometimes she just throws it in for flavour. For those who don't know, Bryson's AT hike led him to Rainbow Springs, where for 2 days he was trapped by a huge storm that slammed the Carolina mountains with 3 feet of snow. Neither the waylaid guest nor his overworked hosts could have been in a very good mood. Jensen and Buddy Crossman grumpily buried themselves in hikers' smelly laundry and went short on sleep. Jensen medicated herself with Marlboro Lights, and Bill Bryson went on to write a few pretty things about the smoke. He also noted that Jensen's chili was pretty terrible and described his nights in an awesomely unlovely bunkhouse as wretched. In subsequent conversations with Jensen, I've tried to get her to embrace the idea that there's no such thing as bad publicity, at least not when it comes to a write-up in a best-selling book for a rundown campground outside Franklin, North Carolina. But Jensen has a certain talent for staying angry. Maybe she just doesn't want to hear it from me, since I can't commiserate with her. Bryson didn't write anything harsh about Mountain Crossings, and anyway, the shop belonged back then to Jeff and Dorothy Hansen, my predecessors. "If Bryson were ever to walk into my store," Jensen says, "I'd tie his ass to a board, rub honey over him, and set him down by the river next to the bee-box. That would sweeten him up a little." "Bad, huh?" "Bad? Are you kidding me? That pansy ass wouldn't know which side of the mountain to walk off when I was done with him. You know, he pissed off a lot of people along this trail, and he better not show his face around here again. Did you hear what he said about my chili? And the bunkhouse? What does he expect? The Hilton with a continental breakfast?" Her barrage goes on for about 5 minutes until she has to stop and catch her breath. She stands there, teeth bared, chest heaving, her cheeks blotched red-hot with anger. "Well, he certainly has sold a lot of books," I say. "Yes, I know, because tourists stop by our little store all the time just to get a glimpse at the rednecks behind the counter," Jensen mutters. "I'm from Jersey, and this ain't no freak show. I think this is my last year. Mind if I smoke?" I can't say no. I can see that she needs it. In order to light up, she must close her mouth. I take the chance to say my goodbyes. "It was nice to meet you, finally, Jensen, Buddy. I will send some hikers your way. You still take the drop boxes, right?" "No way," says Jensen, releasing a huge cloud of smoke. We sell food. You should stop taking drop boxes as well. Your sales on food would go way up. Oh, really? I can't hide my doubts about this. Oh, yes, of course, you have everything they need right here. Don't you hate it when a big drop box shows up in the mail and you know that you sell everything that's stuffed inside the damn thing? Stop taking them. Trust me, a little gem of advice. One you won't regret. It's a busy day. More than 100 hikers are expected to come in from the trail. And as much as I want to hear more of her innovative business strategy, I need an exit. Well, it was great to finally meet you. I really should get back to work. Of course, come up any time. We'll give you a place to stay. As long as I don't expect a continental breakfast.